Red and blue lights hit my rear view and a woman screamed, "Step out now!" My wife barely had time to pull over before 3 people in cheap uniforms rushed her car. Hands on fake badges, voices loud like they owned the road. One of them pointed at her window and said, "HOA security. You're not allowed to drive through this neighborhood." My wife stayed calm, hands visible, heart steady, because she knew something they didn't. This wasn't a routine stop. This was an ambush. It started 2 days earlier when Karen from the HOA taped a notice on our door saying our access card was revoked. No vote, no warning. Just her sharp smile and that tone like she was above the law. I told her this road wasn't private. She leaned in and whispered, "We decide who belongs here." That night, our security camera caught her on the phone, pacing, angry, planning something. We didn't know she would go this far. Back on the road, one fake cop tried the door handle and said, "You're being detained." Another pulled out zip ties. My wife looked at him and softly said, "Call real police now." Karen stepped out from behind an SUV, filming, shaking with excitement. "Arrest her," she yelled. She trespassed. Cars slowed. Phones came out. My wife felt the moment stretch. Then she reached up and turned on her dash cam. The red light blinked. She smiled just a little. "Before you touch me," she said, "you might want to check who you're stopping." Karen laughed. Loud, proud, certain. She didn't see the small patch on my wife's jacket. She didn't hear the dispatcher already on the line. And she had no idea that every second of this was being recorded. From 3 different angles. One thing was clear as the fake sirens echoed down the street. Karen picked the wrong person on the wrong day. "I didn't break your rules," my wife said quietly. "You broke the law." The fake cop froze for a second, then grabbed my wife's arm anyway. That's when a real police cruiser turned the corner, lights clean, sound sharp. Karen's smile slipped. She waved like this was all part of her plan, yelling, "Officer!" She refused HOA orders. The real cop stepped out slow, eyes scanning badges, uniforms, faces. He looked at my wife and asked one simple thing. "Are you okay, ma'am?" She nodded and said, "I am now." Then she handed him her ID. The officer's face changed. Not shocked, respectful. He took a step back and called for backup. Karen kept talking, louder, faster, digging her own hole. "They're trespassing." I authorized the stop. "I run this HOA. The officer finally cut her off. "Ma'am, HOAs don't conduct traffic." "Stops." Silence hit the street. One of the fake cops tried to walk away. Another said they were just volunteers. The officer asked who gave the order. All eyes turned to Karen. She hesitated, then pointed at my wife. "She threatened us." That's when the officer asked for footage. My wife handed over the dash cam, then nodded toward the houses. Doors opened. Neighbors stepped out. Phones raised. Someone said, "I got it all." Backup arrived. Real badges, real authority. Karen's voice cracked as she tried to explain. Then my wife spoke again, calm but sharp. "Run my name." They did. The street went quiet. One officer looked up and said, "Your former federal task force?" My wife met Karen's eyes. "Still active." Karen dropped her phone. The officer turned to her and said, "You just impersonated law enforcement." On camera, he reached for his cuffs. Karen screamed, "This is my neighborhood!" My wife shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "It never was." Karen started crying loud, the kind that sounds fake but desperate. She said she felt unsafe, said my wife scared her, said the HOA would sue everyone. No one listened. The officer asked who owned the road. Karen said, "The association." My wife didn't argue. She just pointed across the street. A man stepped forward holding papers, shaking hands. "I do," he said. "I bought this land 20 years ago." He was the original developer. Karen's face went pale. She had been charging fees, issuing fines, towing cars, on land she never owned. The crowd started whispering. Phones zoomed in. One fake cop tried to explain. They were hired for enforcement. The BO officer asked who paid them. They pointed at Karen again. She backed up, tripped, and fell right in front of her own camera. The sound of cuffs closing cut through the noise. She screamed about power, about rules, about respect. None of it mattered anymore. My wife walked over to the developer and quietly thanked him. He nodded and said, "I was waiting for someone brave enough to stop her." Then he looked at Karen and added, "You ruined a lot of lives." The officer asked if my wife wanted to press charges. She paused, then said yes, because this wasn't about pride. It was about what Karen did to families, to kids, to people who thought they had no voice. As Karen was put in the cruiser, she locked eyes with my wife and hissed, "This isn't over." My wife didn't blink. "It is," she said. "For you." The next morning, our driveway was blocked with an orange notice taped to the gate. Same handwriting, same threat, property access suspended. Karen was already in jail. So this meant someone else was still pulling strings. My wife stood there quiet, reading it twice, then slowly took it down. She didn't work alone, she said. By noon, 2 tow trucks rolled in like they owned the place. The drivers said they were ordered by the HOA board. One of them felt bad and whispered, "This came from above." Before they could hook a single car, my wife raised her phone and started recording. She asked one question, calm and clear. "Who told you this land isn't ours?" They showed an email, sent that morning, from the HOA vice president, Karen's closest friend. That's when it clicked. Karen wasn't the head. She was the loud face. The real power was hiding, hoping fear would do the work. My wife made one call. 10 minutes later, a black SUV stopped at the end of the street. A man stepped out with a badge I hadn't seen in years. He walked past everyone and hugged my wife. The tow drivers backed away fast. The man turned to the vice president, who had just arrived, yelling about contracts and rules. He didn't argue. He just asked for ID, then he asked for emails, then bank records. The vice president stopped talking. My wife leaned toward her and said quietly, "You should have stopped when Karen fell." The woman's hands started shaking. And that's when we realized this HOA wasn't just abusive. It was criminal. By evening, the street looked different. Not quieter, heavier. Neighbors stood outside in small groups, whispering, watching agents walk in and out of the HOA office down the block. Boxes came out, laptops, files, one. Woman started crying when she saw her own name on a list taped to the wall. "Fines collected," it said. Years of them. None legal. The vice president tried to leave through the back. She didn't make it far. 2 agents stopped her, calm but firm. She asked for a lawyer. They nodded. Then asked for the missing funds. Her face went blank. That's when my wife understood the real game. This HOA wasn't about control. It was about money. A neighbor walked up to me and said, "They towed my car when my son was in the hospital." Another said they threatened to lock her house. Stories poured out like people had been holding their breath for years. My wife listened. She didn't promise revenge. She promised truth. One agent asked my wife why she got involved. She looked around at the families, the kids sitting on steps, the flags on porches. "Because bullies grow when no one stops them," she said. Across the street, Karen's house sat dark. No lights, no cameras, no power. The same utility shutoff notice she once used on others was taped to her own door. Someone had written under it with a marker. "Wrong house. Wrong people." The agent folded the paper, slipped it into a file and said, "This goes all the way up." And that's when my wife got another call. From a number marked internal. My wife stepped away to answer. She didn't speak for a long time. Just listened. When she came back, her face was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "They want everything," she said. "Every video, every email, every name." I asked who they were. She paused. "The people Karen thought she was untouchable with." That night, unmarked cars lined the street. Not loud, no sirens, just quiet doors opening and closing. The HOA board members were called in one by one. Weeks later, the street was quiet in a good way. No patrols, no warning notes, just people living. A small ceremony happened one evening without planning it. Neighbors brought chairs, kids held flags, someone grilled burgers. The developer stood up and said the land would stay free. No HOA, no control, just law. My wife didn't speak much. She watched the kids run past the same spot where fake cops once stood. A vet from down the road shook her hand and said, "You reminded us we still have rights." She nodded and said, "You never lost them." Karen took a plea deal. The board members didn't. Charges stacked up. fake authority, fraud, impersonation. Every move they made to scare people came back as evidence, clean, legal, final. The next day, the news vans came, but not for us. They parked outside the courthouse. Names started dropping on TV. HOA board, members, contractors, even a city clerk who signed papers without reading them. Karen's face showed up last, mugshot plain, eyes empty. The reporter said, authorities confirmed this HOA had no legal power over the land. Neighbors stood behind the cameras quiet, watching Truthland in real time. A man from the county came to our house with new documents. He said, this clears everything. No fines. No rules. No HOA control. My wife signed once and handed the pen back. That was it. Years of fear ended with one stroke. The man looked at our flag and said, you did this the right way. But the biggest twist came that evening. A lawyer called. Not threatening. Careful. He said Karen wanted to talk. My wife agreed. At the jail, Karen sat behind glass, smaller than ever. She said she didn't mean for it to go this far. Said she was told what to do. My wife leaned forward and said, you chose who to hurt. Karen looked down. Then my wife slid a paper under the glass. A civil suit. Not just against Karen, but against everyone she protected. Karen's hands shook again. She whispered, they'll destroy me. My wife stood up. You already did that yourself, she said. As we walked out, an officer said quietly, you know this will change things. My wife nodded. That's the point. Outside, the sun was setting over the same street Karen once claimed as hers. Kids rode bikes, neighbors waved. No fear, no rules made by bullies. And for the first time, the place actually felt like home. Weeks later, the street was quiet in a good way. No patrols, no warning notes, just people living. A small ceremony happened one evening without planning it. Neighbors brought chairs, kids held flags, someone grilled burgers. The developer stood up and said the land would stay free. No HOA, no control, just law. My wife didn't speak much. She watched the kids run past the same spot where fake cops once stood. A vet from down the road shook her hand and said, you reminded us we still have rights. She nodded and said, you never lost them. Karen took a plea deal. The board members didn't. Charges stacked up. Fake authority, fraud, impersonation. Every move they made to scare people came back as evidence, clean, legal, final. That night, my wife sat on the porch with me and said one last thing, low and steady. I didn't fight for this country so someone could lie and call it power. The camera from our driveway still blinks red every night. Not for fear. For memory. Because sometimes the biggest mistake people make is judging the wrong house, the wrong family, and the wrong woman. Karen went to jail. The HOA was exposed. Land and families were safe. My wife stood on the porch, watching neighbors laugh and kids play, and said, this street belongs to the people, not bullies.